Nick and myself, I will be presenting the methodology we have employed in Berenike. My presentation will, or our presentation will comprise of 3 parts you see on the top of the screen. I'll be talking about the site a little bit to give you an introduction, although I guess most of you will know the site. Then I will delve into our methodology that we have, for the most part, devised when you, Jerzy, were also still part of our team. And in the last part, I will show some case studies in how we use this methodology to interpret our data and make analysis across the site and hopefully in the future with other sites as well. So Berenike has been shown on maps already several times. It's located on the Red Sea coast. The site was in use from the 3rd century BC until around the 6th AD. In this presentation, I will mainly be focusing on the Roman period, so the 6th century AD, not on the Ptolemaic material. And in the Roman period, Berenike was part of a large trade network which involved ships going from Berenike to India to participate in the Indian Ocean trade network to bring spices from India back to the Roman Empire. And the other way around, we find lots of Roman material, of course, in India as a evidence of this trade. So that's about the site itself, about the broader context. In Berenike itself, excavations recently have been focused on several areas, as you can see on the map over here. So the Hellenistic baths on the left, I won't go into those in detail today. The Isis temple, the tetrastylon, and the northern complex. So as you can see in red, the trenches are highlighted. The Isis temple has been almost completely excavated by now. Next season, next January, we hope to finish the excavations there. Tetrastylon has been partially done, and most of the work's been focusing on the northern complex these days. When explaining the methodology and the case studies, most of the material highlighted comes from the Isis temple because we have the most complete data set from that area yet. Northern complex is still very much a work in progress. Isis temple material to a certain extent as well, because last season we excavated some trash layers with wheelbarrows and wheelbarrows of ceramics, so we were not able to process them during one season, so we hope to finish all the material from the temple this next season, which would give us a complete data set of this temple. As a short introduction on the context that I'll be discussing later on, the temple was probably partially built in the Ptolemaic period, but in the early Roman period under the reign of Emperor Tiberius, it was rebuilt, redecorated, reinstated. It has been in use until sometime in the mid-3rd to 4th century. Then it has collapsed, and in the late antique period, we see some activities in the temple. Exact extent of those activities are difficult to grasp, but lots of late antique material gets dumped and discarded in and around the temple. So that's the fine context of most of our material. In between those late antique rubbish dumps, there is early Roman material as well. So that will be highlighted later on. So I will go into the methodology we employed to study all this material first. And we decided to choose a system that is employed in larger parts of the Roman Empire. And it comprises of a 4-tiered analysis. So our first division is dividing all the sherds in pottery groups. Then we have fabrics, forms, and types. From very broad groups, it goes into much more detail depending on the diagnostic characteristics of each shirt that you have. I will be highlighting all 4 of these groups to explain what we mean by it, how we use it, and how we categorize our ceramics. So pottery groups are 4 broad groups, as you can see here. I saw them in some of the other presentations as well. So we are roughly using the same types of groups. So these pottery groups, almost all Geerts you can assign to one of these groups, because in order to define those, the definition of these groups is quite broad, but also quite distinctive from each other. Because every pottery group has includes ceramics that have been produced in a similar way with similar finishes and roughly have the same repertoire of shapes, which is of course quite clear for the amphorae, but also for the fine wares, those are mostly smoothly finished tablewares like the city plates you see there, or cups. And this first yeah, so this first tier of analysis is actually quite easy to make for most of the Geerts. And that means that most of the ceramics will be fitted into one of these groups. So this is an overview of all the material from the ISIS temple. And you can see a pattern that's quite common everywhere in Berenike. Amphorae are the largest group, and other groups are less present, but we'll see more of that later. So the next stage is the stage of fabric. Fabric and pottery groups are not always the same, because within one pottery group you can have multiple fabrics, the amphorae, but also, as we just saw in Siena, amphorae are produced, but also fine ware, so fabrics can be from one production center can be found in multiple of the pottery groups. But having these separated gives us more tools to analyze the material better and on multiple levels. The defining characteristics of the fabric is, of course, the clay used, inclusions added to the clay in order to make the pots. And based on those characteristics, as you all know, we can discern multiple fabrics, and fabrics should ideally be traced back to production centers or production regions, which, depending on the state of research, is sometimes, but not always possible. So the next stage of forms, I named a couple of forms here. So only when Geerts that you find are diagnostic enough, you can assign them to a form. As with the previous two groups, all Geerts should ideally fit into the pottery group and have a fabric because they're made of clay, but we can only discern a shape or form if the material is diagnostic enough. Most body Geerts are very difficult to give a form, but rims, handles, and bases or decorated parts are usually easier to assign to a certain form. So that means that it's only a smaller part of the data set can be assigned to a form. And then, of course, there is the last level of identification, that's a type. So in order to assign types, we have to use all kinds of typologies. I show you a couple here. And only the most diagnostic parts can be assigned to a certain type, of course. So
I'm sorry, Roderick, I'm sorry for interrupting, but we have some kind of technical problem.
Okay.
I don't know what to do, but our screen is up to turn off in 4 seconds. So sorry if we disconnect.
Okay. Shall I wait till you let me know it's fine?
Sorry. So we will continue in a second. I'm so sorry for this. Okay, great. Please proceed. I'm so sorry.
Okay. So while all materials should be able to fit into the first two groups, because those are intrinsic qualities of the Geerts themselves and the clay itself, types and forms are only possible for a smaller group of all material that you found. And for types, we use some of the publications shown here and other ones in order to fit into the broader into the recent state of research. So after having said this, I will now delve into our database a little bit and show you what it looks like and what we document in our database. So first part of our database has a lot to do with location the pottery was found on the site. So what you see here is the campaign when it was excavated, location on the site. So those broad locations that were shown on the map earlier, like the Ptolemaic Baths, Northern Complex, Isis Temple. Then more detailed information, trenches, loci, and pottery bags or find numbers. And then, of course, the four types or the four levels of analysis that I just mentioned. So the pottery groups, fabrics, forms, and types were available. So this is a highlight of the database where coincidentally much of the types are known, but of course some of those fields are blank for the place of the database. And then the quantification we used. We try to quantify the material in as much detail as possible to allow for further analysis in regards to fragmentation or comparison of contexts. So we counted the material, there is the total count visible, but also we discerned the different types of vessels present, so rims, bases, handles, walls, and spouts or strainers. What we also did, you see here on the next slide, is we measured diameters, we measured the eaves in order to do further analysis between contexts or locations on the site. We weighed every record in the database. Furthermore, we dated the material based on just the specific type. And as you can see on the farthest right, the date of the entire context. In order to make a difference between specific types and their datings and what the influence is on the context dating, we can see that here, and where relevant, we could input bibliographical references and notes, which contain any information, like you see over here, the decoration of the pieces, which can be important as well for both dating and for the analysis. So recently what we did an analysis on the amphorae present in Berenike, both in the early Roman period and late antique period, in order to discern patterns between those periods and where the material comes from. So I'll give you a broad overview here of all the early Roman amphorae fragments found in the Isis Temple. Some of the types are illustrated here, but what you can see, we divided amphorae and transport containers based on their region of origin. So we have material that's produced in Egypt, the Eastern Mediterranean and Indian Ocean, Central Mediterranean, Western Mediterranean, and some unidentified fragments. What you can see here is a clear focus on material from Egypt itself, especially the amphorae Egyptienne are quite common within the material, while material from the other regions is less common, and especially Indian Ocean, Central and Western Mediterranean are found in all contexts actually, but in very small quantities. And if we put that on a map and in a pie chart, you see this pattern. So I've roughly indicated with circles the areas where the material comes from, and then the graph shows you that, as the table did show, that most of the material originates from Egypt. So that meant the site was supplied with lots of material from Egypt itself, and very little material trickled in from either the Mediterranean or the Indian Ocean trade, which is quite interesting because for you would expect more material from the Indian Ocean, because if material came in storage containers, transport containers, vessels from the Indian Ocean, you would expect more rubbish dumps and more material showing up throughout all contexts. But that's not really the case. And when looking at the late antique periods, we see some differences. Here's an overview of some of the types and all the material from the Isis Temple again. It shows obviously that there's much more material from this period. That has to do with what I explained earlier, that most of the material found in the temple is from the late antique trash dumps in and around the temple. We see lots of material from the Eastern Mediterranean. The late Roman amphorae 1 and 3 are quite common. Material from Egypt is common as well, especially late Roman 7 amphorae. And Aswan regional amphorae are present as well in significant numbers. Material from the Indian Ocean and Red Sea area is quite scarce still, and Central Mediterranean is less than before, and Western Mediterranean we haven't found any fragments that can be related to this to the late antique period. So what we see is happening is that patterns are shifting. Also, if you put it on the map with a pie chart again, we see this pattern that most of the material, amphorae and transport material, comes from the Eastern Mediterranean, and Egypt is still quite a significant group, but not as big anymore as in the early Roman period. So we see a clear shift in supply networks supplying Berenike. And when looking at other sites in Egypt and the Mediterranean, we see similar patterns, that certain amphorae productions are flooding the market and are available everywhere, like the late Roman 1 amphorae. So this pattern fits into a broader pattern of shifting trade networks, and it's interesting to see that in Berenike as well. And in this period, at least based on transport and storage containers, the Indian Ocean material is even less, but still it's consistently there in all or most of our contexts, which remains an interesting, interesting tidbit of information, because it's always there, but in very low quantities. And what else we aim to do with our data sets is we can compare these amphora types in different ways. This shows what I've just been talking about, but in relation to each other, we can see the difference between early Roman and late antique material in one glance. You see a clear shift from material from Egypt to material from the Eastern Mediterranean, and also a significant, at least if you look at the bar chart, it looks significant, a drop in material from Central and Western Mediterranean, while essentially it's only a few percent differences, as you can see in the table below. So the most important difference we see between early and late Roman material is the shift in supply from material from Egypt to material from the Eastern Mediterranean. And this is something that the way our data is organized allows us to study the material we found, because we can easily, by using that 4-tier analysis, filter amphorae from a certain context and organize them by types. And we hope to be doing similar analysis with other areas on the site. And when we start working on the Isis temple material in more detail, we can organize and compare all kinds of different contexts. This is just to show that the areas we've been working on, so the Isis temple, Northern Complex, tetrastylon, are quite similar in their complete assemblages, but there are some differences between all the contexts. And further analysis, we hope to show and to find out how these differences occur and what they signify. And I hope that by presenting our database and our way of organizing our data is something that sounds similar to all of you, and that we can work towards a more integral approach in order how to compare our data to each other, share data, and be able to easily compare our contexts and complexes to each other. And for that, meetings like this are very useful.